ReFi, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about current examples and a future. So me, real quick, I founded a ReFi venture firm. I'm a community steward at Gnosis Guild and Prime DAO, and I run a podcast on the ownership economy. The one that's important here is Prime DAO, because Prime DAO is a ReFi launchpad for DAOs looking to launch on Celo. So if you're looking to do that, chat with me. So real quickly, we're in a climate crisis. You probably hear about it all the time. Carbon is a major part of it, carbon credits, especially in ReFi, because we can I was going to say we can see them. That's pretty funny. Anyway, well, you can't see them, but they're really easy to tokenize. It's already been done. It's a 20-year-old project, right? So, but carbon is really not what it's all about. There's watershed health critical for food supply. Topsoil is rapidly eroding. In some places, there's about something like 16, 15 years of harvest left, and others there are 100. So if you live in one of those areas by 15, you're not very lucky. So don't step on it. I'll try. Ocean health is rapidly degrading. Why is that important? Oceans trap 80% of carbon in the atmosphere. So that's like really important, and temperature rise is going to affect that. Air quality already kills about 7 million people a year by various estimates. That's only going to get worse with the effects of COVID in coming years. And as Marcelo mentioned before me, traditional institutions have failed to act, right? So like we're in year 26 of COP. Some scientists say we have about 10 years to save ourselves. We're on a track for 3 degrees warming in this century. It's all pretty grim. So what can we do? One thing I'd like to propose is that it's basically always been us, right? Like we've looked at institutions to kind of save us and coordinate, and institutions are made of people. So I'd say it's always been us. And so one proposal really is like, let's get into what ReFi is and what the promise of DAOs and ReFi is, right? So I'm gonna define it a little bit, principles of it real quick, right? So number one is if you're talking about regenerative finance, it's non-extractive. So that basically means that there are incentive structures in place to either keep the velocity of money flowing through the system and not allowing it to accumulate outside. That doesn't mean that returns don't happen. It just means that we find a way to grow the systems, right? And include more people. Transparency, there's no icon for that. Nothing is an externality, basically. So we have to make sure that we fully account for our ecologies with money designed for that purpose. Community first, specifically, I want to kind of shout out to Marcelo again. If you want to build a global carbon credit economy, it's really, really very specific to what's happening on the ground in these places. Carbon is not fungible, even though it's in a pool as a token, right? So the projects that come from are really important, and the communities who produce the credits are also really important. So from the perspective of like, they have the knowledge of local circumstances, scientific in some cases as well, where they can actually help bring these assets to market. And lastly, it's future facing, because look, the thing is, there are gonna be some people who are super suspicious of us, right? Like, who are these people jumping in with Ethereum? What is that word? There's some people who may not be ready to actually take a seat at this table, so we have to find a way to include them in the future, save a seat for them. And also, there are some people, this is a weird thing I'll take a second to talk about. Not really weird to me, but it sounds weird when you first hear it. There are people who are trying to kind of, I guess the best way to say it is, form an ontology around nature as an object that can be included. Like basically a trust, right? That says, this trust speaks for nature, these are the things that are bad, bad roughly in terms of metrics, and these things can't happen. And that way we've included nature in the trust, like as a legal structure, right? So that's one way that you could consider this being future facing. So now, why ReFi DAOs? I stole this from a friend, Patrick Rawson, who's at Prime DAO, but basically 3 things. Programmable organizations, so if you think back to the traditional institutions that failed us, they're really opaque. It's really hard to tell how they actually work. Programmable organizations like DAOs, that may be a thing that could mitigate this, right? Maybe. I'm very cautious with this stuff. I'm not going to say like, hey, a smart contract that does this and that, when this thing happens is perfect, right? Network cooperation. So at Prime, basically, we built a platform called Prime DAO, Prime Deals, right? And so that basically helps people cooperate, share resources, do token swaps, and pick things that they want to work on together. And that's theoretically something that DAOs can be very efficient at. And that leads into lower transaction costs. So if you've ever read Coase, Ronald Coase, The Theory of the Firm, that's one of the ideas around DAOs, that you can basically make certain things that happen repeatedly on a repeated basis pretty much zero in terms of transaction costs between two parties, right? So how ReFi DAOs? Well, real quick, right? What do I mean by like ReFi after going through those things? What do they actually manage? Marcelo mentioned carbon credits. We could imagine a world where you want to save a watershed, and maybe you have IoT sensors, you have other ways of measuring the health of this watershed. You might maybe measure from the year-end tax receipts how many fish are in this watershed. So you basically, as a community, decide, what do we want to do first? What is our land? What is our ecosystem? Let us produce. What do we want to tokenize? And then you want to look at your stakeholder groups, which is really important because, you know, going back to trust, if people are like, who are these Ethereum people who just came out of nowhere telling us what to do? That's a problem, right? So maybe your stakeholder group is smallholder farmers, maybe it's scientists, maybe it's all of them. And you, of course, you who manage the protocol and work with these folks to get them to adopt it. Then you want to pick a tool fit for the purpose. So I also work with Gnosis Guild on Zodiac Protocol. I don't work on the protocol, I work on the wiki, right? So we're basically distilling patterns for organization, for how you can actually corral the human beings, the stakeholder groups that need to get together to do this stuff. Then there's other tools like, I want to shout out Gnosis Guild Zodiac Protocol, there's DAOstack, DAO House, Moloch DAO, of course, been around for years. And you want to look at, in Cosmos, there's this thing called Groups module, which I'll also pump later on in the chat. And then most importantly, I think you need to move slowly and iterate, right? Because if you fuck something up, which you're going to fuck up, you need to have the trust to fall back on with these folks that you can keep going, right? If you generate a carbon credit that turns out that, let's say it's a nature carbon solution, it's supposed to come from a new plantation of trees, but the trees get burned down 60% in their third year, that carbon credit's not going to be worth what it was supposed to be worth to the people who you worked with on the ground to make that thing. But they have to have trust in you in order for you to keep going, right? So let's talk a little bit about tooling, and then we'll talk about examples. I mentioned these folks, and I'm actually going to skip this slide. Let's look at real-world examples. I want to talk about, to make this real for you, like stakeholder groups, what does that mean? Let's talk about Uniswap's governance network real quick, right? This is what it is today. Roughly 18% of the protocol sits with USV, Andreessen Horowitz, and Paradigm, right? They're VCs. And then you have a $3 million a year spin-out for Uniswap, grants, those folks have voting power as well, and there's a ton of small shareholders. This is not a super diverse group, right? So like if you wanted to come to Uniswap and say, hey, what's the carbon impact of Uniswap's protocol, and we'd like to offset it, it'd be great if there was a stakeholder group over here on the right that was like, that's a worthy goal, let's talk about how to do that. We're experts on it, we're scientists or what have you, right? To some extent, I will say that Andreessen Horowitz has at least done that, where they've delegated their votes to Stanford University, to public institutions. So it is a little bit decentralized. It's getting there. But there's like really two potential futures from that last thing, right? You either get DAOs that become subsumed and instrumentalized by pension funds, by ostensibly these giant, BlackRock, all these folks. Or you get ones that kind of endogenously structure. This is a big word, but self-sovereign crypto native institutions, right? So that's really what we're shooting for here. When you think about what Marcelo was talking about with ReFi, I just love he was before me. It's really specific because you could then look at this and say, we're trying to protect the watershed, or we're trying to build an economy around carbon credits for a Toucan protocol. Who should we include in our governance? Part of that should be scientists who work in this. Other parts of it might be the biggest carbon credit producers and verifiers in the world, right? It's not just, I bought the token on, Uniswap. So it'd be great if in the future, for something like this, if you were in my little imaginary example, you were taking Uniswap and saying, let's offset Uniswap's carbon environmental impact. It'd be great if there was a rival or parallel set of institutions that could work to also shape this in that direction, right? So what does that look like? Well, so there's this great fellow we met last week at ReFi Barichara. His name's Breno, and he runs Econavi. Econavi is a community staking DAO. So what Econavi does is it runs validators for Region Network and IXO. And what it does is it uses those block rewards to provide funding to the DAO, and the DAO's only job then is to decide which projects in the platform get support. So when I say projects, I don't mean like sub-DAOs. I mean all across Brazil you have these groups on the ground that are growing chocolate, or growing cacao, producing chocolate, doing textiles, and they're all mostly organized as cooperatives. And these folks are now getting pulled in, right? They're getting pulled into Web3 this way, through this DAO, because they're saying, look, I know it sounds weird. We have this source of free money. You're gonna help us manage it. You're gonna see it's real, right? And so this gets really important because they have this networked representative governance with stakeholders. Some of these folks get so into it, they go, I would like to form a sub-DAO of cacao producers in my region. We would like to take our block rewards and put them back in Econavi to produce more, or we'd like to use it to expand operations, right? It gets really interesting. Spirals protocol. These folks I met a few weeks ago at the, let me get this right, Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offset Working Group, BICALC. So it's a lot of letters. Very simply, what these folks do is on Celo, on Ethereum, on Polygon, you can go stake with them. You get a green token representative of the thing you stake, and then you can use that to participate in DeFi, or more interestingly, you can go and build DApps that automatically offset their impact because the G token, the token you staked, is then directed at real-world climate impact projects. So that's all well and good, but what's interesting is they have this way they're going about it where they're electing an independent climate committee that's separate from the protocol, that's made up of scientists, it's made up of the climate impact project stewards themselves. It's another version of network governance that's moving towards a DAO, and this will be a real ReFi DAO when it's done, right? And then I want to shout out my friends at Collectivo who are downstairs, come talk to us. We are basically another big word, localized exchange trading system, LETS. They're basically trying to make local decentralized exchange trade networks for local commons. So what that means is, if you're one of these folks across Brazil and you want to basically say with fellow local folks, hey, what should we tokenize? What should we produce? And how can we share it and get bootstrap funding for it? There's a global local token that helps you do that. The global actors can fund and provide liquidity for your project. You decide with the various badge holders in your local circumstance, how you're going to produce, what you're going to produce, how you're going to make it available, all that stuff. So it also has a polycentric governance model of scientists, agroforestry experts, farmers, and protocol token holders. And that's it. Those are my examples. That's why I think ReFi is really important and why I think DAOs are its future. So I don't know if you have time for questions. Ah, damn, that's a good question. Do you have a 7-year-old? Oh, I have an 8-year-old. This is a good practice. Yeah, of course. So she asked me, what is the definition of ReFi for a 7-year-old? And she's recording, so I can't cuss. For me, there's a lot of articles on this, but really for me, it's really about the principles of it, right? I think I kind of mentioned them, right? It has to be community first. It has to be non-extractive. It has to feed the incentives and flows into the system are already 2 words for 7-year-olds, damn it, sorry. The way that money goes through the system, it has to come back into it then in a way that actually helps people do more stuff with that money. It doesn't just sit there in someone's bank account, right? And then lastly, I think it's for your future, right? We want to find a way where you, 7-year-old, can, when you're ready, come in and help us determine where this thing goes. That's not always true for the regular extractive financial system, right? If you want to join it, maybe you got to go to a top 25 Ivy League institution and become a banker. You don't have to do that. You can build a local economy with your friends. Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna repeat this. So we can do this by example. Super simple way. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So the question was, can you give me an example? Very simple example. If you own a piece of land, today you value it by what you can extract from it and sell. Trees, timber, right? All we're saying with ReFi is that the carbon the soil traps, the carbon the trees trap, the oxygen it produces, the water that it helps to restore watersheds, can all be equally valued for ecosystem services. So that you don't have to cut everything down, you might actually be paid to do more of the good stuff. It's as simple as that. I'm gonna have to cut you off, sorry. You can talk to me after. Any other questions? Can you yell? Sure. The question was, what do you think is the next milestone for ReFi, right? I'm very excited about this because it's going to sound terrible, but I actually think it's financializing nature in a way that we control. So basically everything I just said for this answer around what is the value of trapping carbon in soil, carbon in trees, producing oxygen, restoring watersheds, being able to say, in the future, I want to build a contract that lets me get paid today to do a thing that I deliver later, does not exist today. You can do that for almost anything out in a market. You can't do it to restore nature. I think that's really exciting. And we're working on that this year, so come talk to me if you're interested in that.